Hi, and welcome to the Selected Tech podcast, brought to you by a group of 4 MVPs doing webinars, sessions, and interviews on all things SharePoint, Office 365, and the Microsoft AI ecosystem. Their motto is learn, share, reuse. And here they are, Albert Jan, Rick, Stefan, and Thomy.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Good evening, or good afternoon, or good morning, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome back to another episode of Selected Tech. Today, we're going to talk about Microsoft Graph Toolkit in Blazor. Tommy's going to walk us through how to use the Microsoft Graph Toolkit in Blazor. Blazor is brand new. I think it's now 2 years old or something. It's recently new, and I love it. It's C# to the next level. So, Tommy, you feel free. You can take over the screen and show us how it's done.
Yep, thanks for the introduction. So, today, as Rick already mentioned, we will have a walkthrough through using the Microsoft Graph Toolkit in Blazor. Before we start with the Blazor part, just a short introduction about the Microsoft Graph Toolkit. It's basically a collection, as it says here, of reusable framework-agnostic components for you to use in your project if you want to interact or plan to interact with the Microsoft Graph. Blazor is a web framework that allows us to, that allows people like myself that never properly learned to write TypeScript or like high-level React JavaScript stuff to use the old C# skills. I think I'm not the only one in the group, right, Rick?
You're not the only one.
Yeah. So what was working already, I think it must have been somewhere around 2006, 2007 with .NET 1.0 to .NET 2.0, one of the first projects I remember in the company. Still works in C#, so using those old skills pays off finally. But again, we are using the Microsoft Graph Toolkit, and we are using the login component, and I will walk you through to create such a nice agenda with really just those 2 lines there. And the idea of using the Graph Toolkit is not only we want to use the toolkit for providing us with a way to authenticate against the graph, but also to reuse all the different components that are already there in HTML in Blazor without the need to rewrite stuff in Blazor. And we will have a discussion about application in a second when we walk through the code. Blazor, I rooted in that case for a Blazor server application. Blazor comes in 2 flavors. There is the part where Blazor runs on the server, like in this project. And basically what happens is that you have a client in your browser, and there is a signal R connection between the client and the browser. And whenever you update something, there is in the framework handling of the session. And you can, for example, let's have a look at here. We have, notice the project file. Let's open up one of the pages just to give you an idea. You have here HTML and down there, good old C#. And what Blazor server allows you to do is that this code actually runs on a server, and you can, if you want to go deeper, you can pre-compile it and send it over, or you can compile it directly on the client. That's not the problem, but it's on server side. And there is another big flavor that's called WASM. This is the whole WebAssembly story where you actually don't have a server. So you create your page, and that everything you create in your project, all the DLLs, they are streamed to the client, and with a mono framework in all the modern browsers, they are compiled, or they're using the pre-compiled stuff, and then create the experience you want in the browser. So that's very different, because in a WASM project, basically every bit and every byte get moved to the client. So just think of authentication. You don't want to store a client secret in there because it's in the browser. So for what they are always called, those Alice and Bob in security, the bad guy and the good girl. Mm-hmm. So if there's someone that wants to have a crack on it, they can go into the code, disassembling or have a look like in the JavaScript files, and get out the authentication token or the secret. And on the server side, it's really on the server, so you are safe and can work with authentication there. So one way to talk to the graph would be using EMSA library, for example, create a client ID and a client secret and just authenticate against the graph. But that's not what we want to achieve today. We want to use the Microsoft Graph Toolkit. And why the Microsoft Graph Toolkit? For two reasons. In this demo, we are focusing on just a page running in the browser on .NET 5. But as you can see here, I'm already configuring here what's called an authentication provider from the Graph Toolkit. And there is a provider, something like a provider chain. You see here is a Teams provider, and my EMSA provider depends on the Teams provider. What this two provider steps allows us to do is that this page will in the future work in Teams and authenticate with the Teams provider. But if I just open up the page without the Teams context, I'm using the EMSA provider and can just serve the page without the Chrome of Teams. So I can really consume the page in two ways. That maybe doesn't make sense if you think from, okay, creating a total new page. But what if you only want to integrate an existing application into Teams? So you have also the need to still serve the user your regular page, but just add Teams to it. Then this setup makes really sense to use the Teams provider and the EMSA provider and then move on. So just have one way to configure it. We are in a Blazor server page. So how do we include JavaScript files? Because we are now in a Razor page, and you see here in the Razor page, I'm not allowed to use a link. So I'm not allowed to use a script link. I have here the hosts CS HTML page where I just am allowed to load them. So it's pretty easy to just load the Microsoft Graph Toolkit loader. I'm already also including the Teams JavaScript SDK, although we're not going to use it today. So this line is the one that we need to do to include because the Blazor component basically takes this templating page, this hosts CHSTML, and then renders the Razor pages inside the frame there. So that's basically the header definition, because in a normal Razor page, you don't have a header there. You just have these routing routines over here to say, okay, under my default route, I'm going to serve this page here. And what we're going to do with that, let's have a look at the application, and then I will walk you through. It's a pretty straightforward application, just the default Blazor application that comes with this navigation and the counter, and I'm just changed the index page here, and I already added the Microsoft Toolkit login component, and it already logged in because I did that, of course, a couple of minutes ago to try it out. I click on Get Teams. I didn't create some loading indicator, so I have to wait for a couple of seconds. Then my drop-down is loaded with all my teams from my tenant. And then I can go to one of the teams. And here are all the members of said team, for display name, an email, and a role. So it's just a demo use case to use the Microsoft Graph. Yeah, you can guess I'm working on an idea a little bit greater, but for that demo use case, it's just all my teams, and I can change. And you see there's an update there. You see also that it's already a Blazor technology here at play. Let's get rid of that notification. Sorry for that. If I'm moving through different teams, and those teams are all on my development tenant, so it's not lots that's going to change. So always the same 2 or 3 accounts. There's no flickering. There's nothing. That's just the Signal R connection that changes the data here. And without the postback, without anything special, we get the new data here. So that's already done in the framework. And we will see as a developer, it's very, very easy to get started here. But how did we get so far to reach out to the graph and get back the members of our team. First of all, we have here our login component. So that was the part with my face there to log in. And what I configured before that is this MSAP provider, where I have a client ID, and the client ID actually is an Azure Active Directory application defined in my tenant with these scopes. And then it's very important that you define the authority with your own tenant name if you use a single tenant application, because with that, there's a connection. If you don't add your tenant name here, the provider assumes that you are using a multi-tenant application, and that's a different way you need to configure stuff. It's easier for me just to go through, and there's a pop-up, and I will show later in the demo. I will sign out and sign in again. It's actually just a pop-up that you all know from logging into Office 365, and then we get a token. And the interesting part is that, as you can see here, everything from the Microsoft Graph Toolkit is just plain HTML and JavaScript. And down here, we have C# from Blazor. So there needs to be a way to interrupt with those two worlds. And that's why I created this small button. That's very easy. And then I'm referencing here JS invoke async. That's an important part. That's actually using the JavaScript runtime from Blazor to invoke a JavaScript function. Because Microsoft Graph Toolkit is JavaScript and HTML. I'm on the Blazor side, so I can't really call into this login component straight away. But what I can do is that I can register the JavaScript runtime, inject it as a service, because that's available as one of the default services in Blazor, is the JavaScript runtime. And then I'm calling invoke async. I'm expecting a string back, get token. So
Blazor
how is this?
Goes to the page and executes JavaScript on the page for you.
Yep, that's why in my www root, never said it in English before. Interesting word. There's JavaScript file, and there's my function. And what I'm doing is I'm calling the Microsoft Graph Toolkit, the providers, the global provider, and call the get access token JavaScript function. And actually, that function gives me back the token I want, because I'm already clicked on login in my Microsoft Graph Toolkit login component, and I could go even more sophisticated, because I could register an event handler if the status changed of this login component and go through and make it all seamlessly, but I didn't want to do it in the demo. Also, I could, for example, make this login component, this click event myself. So whenever I refresh the page, I'm already trying to sign in. So the user doesn't need to click there. It's just in the demo case where I didn't want to connect everything up, because then the code gets again unreadable for the beginners. But here I'm now I'm relaying on, okay, I need to click on the login component and then click get teams, and then I get the data back. So this the click through. If I have my token, then I can call my service. And that's where I'm going a little bit deeper into Blazor, because I don't want my UI component here to directly talk to the data. I want to have this separated in a nice service. So in Blazor, I created a small class, my graph service, and there you see get teams. I create a graph service client, and then in the authorization part, I'm using the option to already start the graph service client or create the graph service client with a bearer token of my own. So I'm getting the token from JavaScript, from the Microsoft Graph Toolkit, and hand it over here to the .NET component, and just try to grab some teams here. That's the very, very .NET way to do. But normally you would go a different way over here in terms of authentication. In that case, I already have my bureau token, just need to create the graph service client with said token, and I'm good to go. And what I experienced then was, okay, the get teams part was very easy. The get members part was not so easy. Why? There are two ways actually to do that. There is the G8 version 1 way, where you need the ID of a team to then go to the group endpoints and get back the members and the owners. Or there is the beta endpoint already for teams, where you can go and say, okay, I want my members from this team and get it directly through the created client. But this is in beta version. The interesting part is that since I think November, the beta endpoint uses the same namespace as the G8 one. Before that, it was like using Microsoft Graph.beta. Now it's the same one. So you need to create an alias. Otherwise, your compiler and your linker has problems because no idea what class it lives in what DLL. And actually, that's also just, let me open it up here. Where is my edit? Copied from a documentation page from the Microsoft Graph.net client. You just need to provide, okay, I have both packages in here, and I need to change the alias of the assembly to beta library, and then create the alias on top here, so that I'm able to create a beta graph service client that also gets back members in a different way. So I'm mixing the libraries here, and to make sure that I'm always in the right type, I need to define this alias here. But in the end, pretty same approach, creating the graph service client, handing over the bureau token, making the async call, getting the data back, and then I created just a small list of what my own class, my custom team member class. Why? Because over here, you see also something special from Blazor. The list of my team members is this div here. And this is this member roster. So this is a non-standard HTML component. It's a Razor component because I created it on my own. That's how you can create building blocks in Razor. You just define a new Razor file in your project, define the HTML part. And in that case, it's very easy because I just hand over a list of custom team members, a class that I defined here in my graph service directly in there, not super clean, but just 3 properties. And with that, I'm handing it over to the component in a very easy way because I'm just saying my member roster input data is team members. And that's actually what I'm getting back if my teams dropdown change event is triggered. I get back the team that was selected, hand over the selected team ID, my token from my graph service. This was the beta endpoint I showed you before. Get the members back, have it here. You see it's just a property in the component, and yeah, hand it over as input data to my own component. And in here, everything C#, some null checking. And if you're good to go for each team member in my collection, just create a div with the display name, the email, and the roles. So basically what you normally would do in some JavaScript or some templates in React or Angular or whatever, you can do in here or inline here with C# in Blazor. And with that small example, let's run it again. I'm already connected. I can even go and have this small card here. Clicking on Get Teams, calls the one method to fill my drop down here. And I'm going back to my Teams platform demo because there should be 3 values. I have an owner and I have 2 members in the team. So what about if we want to use some pre-existing components from the Graph Toolkit as well? Just a quick addition to the existing code, just copying something from here. Let's go back to the index. You see here, this is the drop down, this is my button. Let's say between the drop down and my, let's do it between the button here, maybe better. I'm just adding now the Microsoft Graph Toolkit agenda control, rerun the application. And again, this will work because I'm including the JavaScript reference to the Microsoft Graph Toolkit. And you see here my calendar data. And if I'm checking it, there is my calendar from that day. It's today. You see the recording here. Let's do another test entry for the demo as well. Save in Outlook on the web. And let's do a refresh here. And it's here with 1 line of adding a component. And the Microsoft Graph Toolkit gives you a lot of different components. And that's why I like the idea of mixing the Graph Toolkit with Blazor, because then I can create my own logic as well, but can also reuse what is already created. And there is even, I think, let's have a look at the different components. You see there is the example here from the same agenda. So it's just those 2 lines, same as in the example. There's a login, person, people, agenda, tasks, people picker, and all those components also have event handlers. So you can also register your own events to it, which makes sense if you think of connecting it to, in our case, to Blazor application. And then the different providers, where you have MSAL, SharePoint, Teams. And those 3 make a lot of sense for our use cases. We want to mix pages and basically be in a position where we can surface our content in all the possible ways. And a very, very interesting component is the get here, because here you can define inside your HTML properties, basically calls to the Microsoft Graph with this MGT get component. You see here resources, me messages. So it's the me endpoint, and I'm loading the messages, and then there's a template definition, and that's what you get back. So you can make calls just inside of HTML to the Microsoft Graph with this component. And that's, of course, if you think of reusable components, reusable code, also something I want to use in my Blazor projects, because otherwise I would need to write all this code on my own. So I can mix, let's say, the best of 2 worlds. I have my authentication, very easy with the Graph Toolkit, and just with the registration of this small JavaScript function here, I can call my token service and can get started. Of course, if I want to take this more to a production level, I need to think of, okay, where is a better place to store the token. It would be a good idea to create this service maybe as a scoped service, so it's available for the session you are in. So if someone closes the browser tab or closes the browser, your token is gone. So it makes no sense, for example, to make this a singleton service, because then every user of your page, and we are on a server page, every user will have the same token. This would be like a security nightmare. So you need to be careful, and you need to understand how those things work together. But with just a few lines of C# and the Microsoft Graph Toolkit, you already can start to, I think, have a good framework to go get creative with what the Graph Toolkit offers, and then just add all the good stuff that is coming from Blazor. And of course, you can also create the same thing with Blazor WebAssembly. It's just where I'm now, and from where I'm standing now from the security point of view, I'm more leaning to Blazor server. So I'm pretty sure, and then don't need to worry too much about what happens on the client. And that's it, basically.
You're not using a secret, right? So you're just passing along because
yeah, I'm not using a secret. It's all hidden in there, basically, in the Microsoft Graph Toolkit login component. If I go in here and sign out for 1 second, let's go back. I think we need to restart.
Yeah, probably caches.
Yeah, it's now, because it's local lost, it's not cached anymore. So you just have your normal sign-in pop up. Because in the code, you see it here, login type is pop-up. So there's a normal login pop-up here. And that's just to get started. And of course, you could code it in a way that this, for one example, works seamlessly without popping up because you already know it, or you don't rely on someone to click there. Because in that case, now if I click on Get Teams, it won't work because the bearer token doesn't exist and there will be an error. So I'm relying on a happy path here in the demo. But I can also make this click on the sign in button through a JavaScript call by the Microsoft Graph Toolkit login component. So actually, the page would open and would ask me immediately to log in without anything else. So I'm pretty sure that, or I can make the application aware, is the user logged in or not, and behave differently. That's not here for the sake of being very simple in the demo, but normally you would wrap everything that is behind closed doors, so to speak, in a component or in an if, where you say, okay, I'm only showing you this content if I'm able to get the token, basically. If I don't have a token, no button here. But that's adding just way more load on the existing code already.
Cool. Nice sample.
Yeah, pretty cool.
Really love the fact that with the Graph Toolkit you can, well, I'm not gonna say demo because it's like production ready code, but in like 10 minutes you can have an application that looks fancy enough to demo the idea that you have in your head, and perhaps it requires some additional branding at some point, but just getting an over or a list of things or tasks like you showed, it's really easy.
See here the to-do component, it's just this one HTML tag here. Or person card.
Yeah, all the boilerplate code is gone. You don't have to get an HTTP client call the Microsoft Graph. So that makes it a lot easier.
You don't need to reinvent the wheel for the 125th time again. It keeps your code base pretty clean. So and of course, I mean, for other Blazor projects, you can go deeper, and you can also, for example, this member rooster that I created here for a demo, you can start creating your own NuGet packages with services or reusable Blazor components. So you can make like pick and choose there as well. But you need to start somewhere, of course, and it makes no sense to go very deep in the very first demo.
True.
Yeah, because the Graph Toolkit is not limited to Blazor, right? You can do it.
No. You can use it in plain HTML. You can use it in whatever framework. It's framework agnostic. I know that they started out with the idea, of course, of client-side development, so the whole React world. But I mean, in the end of the day, Blazor also creates JavaScript and HTML. So I can make use of that using this include here. There's just one, and I think we talked about that on Twitter a couple of months ago. Those URL, I think there's an ampersand there, or an @ or something like that. That's something that bugged me for a couple of days to make sure, okay, that's different than in plain JavaScript and HTML because it's Blazor. But from there, I mean, if you have code like this, every .NET developer can go crazy starting from here. And the interesting thing would also be that they didn't try that, but it should also, or at least in my mind, it should also work. I'm using now the Graph service in our Graph service client with the, I don't know, the actual API, the actual naming, the PNP library.
PNP Core, PNP GS.
Core that now moved also to .NET Core.
Oh yeah, I think that's PNP Core.
PNP Core, PNP library, I'm not sure. But with that, you can also include those libraries in your code here and can work against SharePoint, for example, using the C# libraries. And that's pretty cool to have that in your own applications, because what I want to achieve, or what I want to take this demo further, is like an idea to list all your teams here. And maybe because we have another community project where we focus a little bit on the education space, and a lot of teachers are complaining that I have one team with all my students that just want to copy it over to another team. And of course, for us, it's not a problem. We use, I don't know, the CLI, the PowerShell. We could even create the graph call on our own. That's not a tough task for us, but for educators, maybe I don't know, history teacher, there is no idea of making aware of the bureau token. That makes no sense. So create an application where you maybe click through your teams and just say, okay, this list of people also in that team would already help them in their day-to-day job. And that's something, a use case we are working on now to maybe assist some German-speaking educators in how to manage teams.
Cool.
Login.
Nice use case.
Login consent, and then go ahead.
Login consent, or I'm just brainstorming now. I didn't try anything because maybe the application consent isn't enough that the user can get me. Maybe just really use the token if you just connect to Office 365 and get that back, like the PowerShell of PNP does with this browser login. So I really get your token, and then I think I don't need to have the app consent, but that's the security part of that solution.
Cool.
Okay.
Cool. Nice sample.
Nice one.
Looks like there's an opportunity for some more samples going even deeper into it, because I know you already built it to work in teams. So
I know, and I need to shout out to Beth Penn from the Microsoft Graph Toolkit team, because I started these examples I think last year in summer, and I, as always, enthusiastically submitted a PR and GitHub, and then ran out of time. So I need to go back and publish that as well. But we'll mention her on Twitter, so she makes sure that she notices this video as well.
Cool. Then I guess that's it for today. Tonight, morning.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks. See ya.
See you next time.
See you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. Make sure to check out the show notes at selectedtech.show to get all the mentioned references. And one more thing. Please tweet about the podcast and give them a 5-star review. This really helps the guys a lot. Thank you, and see you next time. Bye.